Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Shaukat Ali Khan, and I am the Chief Information Officer at the Aga Khan University. On behalf of the Aga Khan University, it is my pleasure to welcome you to another installment of our distinguished lecture series. I want to start off by acknowledging our partnership with the University of Central Asia, our sister Aga Khan Development Network Institution of Higher Education, in hosting this event, as well as the invaluable support of our partners, the CXO Global Forum. It is also a distinct pleasure to be welcoming you from our AKU auditorium in Nairobi, Kenya. As many of you know, we have hospitals, healthcare centers, and university campuses in 6 countries: Pakistan, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Afghanistan, and the United Kingdom. Our last few lectures were hosted from our initial campus in Pakistan, but I look forward to ensuring that we are able to host lectures from more of our campuses and enable in-person participation for individuals from those countries. I would be highly remiss not to acknowledge our over hundreds of participants who have joined online for this event, from as far from Nairobi, North America, and Japan. A possibility that has been enabled only by the rapid pace of digitalization and technological evolution, as knowledge creation and knowledge sharing continues to accelerate across borders in our already highly but increasingly interconnected world. This ongoing evolution in ICT, the importance of which was highlighted during the inception of the COVID-19 pandemic, as physical or in-person events were necessarily curtailed, continues to transform the field of education that AKU, UCA, and other universities are engaged. It is therefore my distinct pleasure to express my profound and personal gratitude to Klara Jelinkova and Howard University for agreeing to speak and share insights on the future of digital education. I have to also specifically acknowledge and express my deep appreciation and respect for the fact that Klara is joining us from Boston at 5 a.m. local time. This is demonstrative and indicative of her personal commitment to advancing knowledge and ideas across borders and frontiers. Klara is an exceptionally talented and distinguished leader within the field of higher education and technology. As a vice president and university chief information officer at Howard University, she is responsible for information technology strategy, policies, and services that support Howard University's teaching, learning, research, and business operations. Klara also leads Howard University Information Technology, Howard's central IT provider that serves more than 50,000 educators, students, and staff. Prior to joining Howard, Klara held a variety of IT leadership positions within the higher education sector. From 2016 to 2021, she was the vice president for the international operations and IT and chief information officer at Rice University, where she led in the creation and development of a new IT organization. Under her leadership, Rice University received 2 CIO 100 Innovation Awards in 2018 and 2019. Klara currently serves on the boards of Internet 2 and several advisory boards of Fortune 500 companies. More recently, in 2021, Klara was selected as the Houston CIO of the Year. Let's all please give a big round of applause as we welcome Klara online.
Thank you so much. Shaukat, I have to admit, it's always an incredible pleasure to be recognized by one of the distinguished international leaders such as yourself. And thank you for such a wonderful introduction. And I have to admit, it's looking at the room that you are in with the beautiful sunshine. It's still dark here, so it's amazing what you have been able to achieve in building a global system of universities. So congratulations, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having me. I have few slides that I would like to share because I'm very happy to be talking to you about this very important topic, which is future of digital education. But I just want to frame it with few thoughts that can set the context for this conversation. And then I hope that we will spend some time in discussion. So allow me to just switch to share screen just for a minute. Can you see the slides okay? I see nods, so that's great. And I hope you can see me as well, because I know you are well taken care of with very capable hands of the technology staff. So let me just advance here. I'm assuming that you all know Harvard, or at least heard of Harvard. It's the oldest university in the United States, yet it pales in comparison to universities in Europe or Asia in its age. When people think of Harvard, they often think of the kind of the iconic campus in Cambridge that's comprised of nearly 400 buildings, where our 12 schools, most of our 12 schools are located. We have 2 schools that are actually located in Boston and Allston. But when they think about that campus, they really think about one type of experience, which encompasses 32,000 students and 18,000 faculty and staff. But Harvard actually also has a digital campus, and the systems that we run, the systems that we touch, the community that we serve is over 500,000 members in our online community. And those are people that actually connect to Harvard digitally, right? And so to give you an example of how this is made up is, even though 32,000 students might seem like quite a few, just Harvard Business School online has 28,000 students, right? And so it's, when we think about digital education or the future of education, we need to think about kind of this connection between what we think of when we think of university, which is the physical manifestation of it, and then the increasingly larger footprint, which is the digital footprint of the university. So just thinking about Harvard's evolution in digital education, even though Harvard might appear as especially when you look at the pictures, it might appear as a very traditional institution. Harvard has actually been an early innovator, starting with iSight, which was sort of in-house developed learning management system before the market caught up. We had our own in-house system. And then you probably all have heard of edX, which was a partnership that we had with MIT in the MOOC era, right? And so what happened during that time in the kind of 2012, 2013 timeframe was 2014 timeframe, was that on-campus instruction went from using custom software to building an ecosystem of commercial products, whether it's Canvas, Kaltura, Panopto. I'm sure that you have your own products that you're using in your ecosystem. And then the online education continued innovating by developing, right? So instead of integrating products, by developing new software, which was edX. And that started a little bit of a bifurcation. So, there's Harvard Business School, Harvard Business School Online, there is HarvardX. This bifurcation kind of started, and it was, it happened really during the MOOC era, when institutions did not quite know what was going to happen and what offering online education was going to mean for how they were perceived, right? all the way to the right, I just want to bring to your attention this Harvard Key Light. What that is really our identity management solution that allows more flexible provisioning of accounts of people that are not necessarily in kind of the core population of faculty, students, and staff, but are part of this extended population. And that's what allows us to flex into the 500,000 or more in our digital footprint. So what happened, Shaka already alluded to kind of the pandemic, right? And it's very difficult to not think about the pandemic. So what happened in March of 2020 was all of a sudden this kind of bifurcated world converged, right? All of a sudden it was not separate online and in person. It had to happen simultaneously. Those two worlds had to come together in order for us to continue operating. So on the left side here, you see kind of a typical Harvard Business School class. So I actually teach in the business school, not at Harvard Business School, but different business school. And this is a typical business school design, kind of similar to where you're sitting in Kenya, quite frankly, that is a tiered design, horseshoe shape. And then in the front, there is a faculty member that is teaching, in this case, because this is Harvard Business School, the case study method, right? So the boards, there are 6 boards, and you use the boards to teach the case study method. When pandemic happened, all of a sudden we needed to distance people. All of a sudden we needed to bring people remotely. And so what the business school has done is, and you see this picture, this is, you know, how the classes were taught during the pandemic. You see the spacing between students. So all of a sudden, not all the students that could be in the classroom before could fit in. And the business school thought about, well, how do we bring people in remotely, and how do we integrate the classroom into a hybrid mode? And what they went back to, and I think this is very important when we think about technology, they thought about the pedagogical impact of bringing people remotely. And so instead of putting, let's say, a set of screens up front in the classroom next to those boards, they put them in the back, and they envisioned this as yet another row in the classroom, right? And so it was intentional that if you're sitting in one of the seats, let's say in the first row, if somebody's speaking behind you, you have to turn your head, right? And to mimic that experience, that's how they modeled the digital experience. But you can imagine that design would not necessarily work in, let's say, Faculty of Arts and Sciences, where you teach labs or where you teach small seminars. So what we have seen in the last, since the pandemic started, has been this innovation in this convergence of the digital and the physical campus. And we were studying it as it was going on. And so in 2021, the provost commissioned a task force on teaching and learning, on the future of teaching and learning. By the way, you can Google this report. This report is publicly available. And it really talks about Harvard's findings from the pandemic. And it's an extensive report. And if you have a chance, I would suggest that you take a look at it because it is how we see the education evolving. But I'm going to only focus on areas where maybe where technology is actually directly relevant. So there are really 3 areas. The first one is increasing interactivity. So one of the things that struck us, and I'm sure it struck you when you were going through the pandemic, was that as good as the tools that we had at our disposal were, the simultaneous multi-person interaction just was not there, right? So what the magic that happens in the classroom, the the ad hoc conversations, to be able to break in and break out into small conversations. It was a little bit forced, right? Or quite a bit forced. And so we saw this as a serious gap in the tooling. It could be chat functions, but really thinking even beyond beyond chat. The other was the ability to bridge space. I mean, that was one of the amazing things about the pandemic, was not only could you bring guest experts to class remotely, kind of what we are doing here, but also think very, very differently about how many people can actually attend Harvard and how many people Harvard can reach digitally that may not be possible for them to reach in the physical world. And then having increasing personalized learning opportunities. So be able to provide education for students who may not be able to join us in Cambridge, and also have additional tools that can aid individual students' learning. So from that came this vision for learning experience platform. This is a project that we are currently in the process of developing, because we are sort of going back to the basics, if you will, of realizing that there are tools that we have to develop, that we will not be able to acquire all of the tools that we need. And we are really thinking about it as an extensible learning platform that is going to provide this transformational learner-centric experience. We are in the midst of developing it. We will have the first classes go on it this summer as a kind of a pilot with our law school and our business school. So when we are talking about this learning experience platform, the way that we are envisioning it is really replicating a virtual campus, right? And what we mean by that is, when you think about kind of what we were offering during the pandemic, was we were very good at offering the kind of lecture setup, right? Or delivering the classroom content. But there's a lot more that happens at a university outside of the classroom. And it was those pieces that the students actually missed the most. They did not have the interaction, the social interaction with their peers. They didn't have the interaction of going to the library and studying and being physically present with other people, or being present with other people. And that was part of the loneliness of the pandemic. And so we are more focused on how we provide durable connections in the digital world that go beyond the confines of the class, right? Many of us have learning management systems, and you kind of provision the class at the start of the semester. Students are provisioned into the tool, and then when the class ends, essentially they are no longer, they might have access to the class, but that community kind of disintegrates. Well, that's not how universities work, right? In a university, you go to class, but you meet people and you're interacting with them after the class. And that's kind of where the digital world is not as, the digital tools currently available are not as robust in replicating that experience. So obviously, we're looking at blended residential learning, where there's an integration between this kind of online and in-person modality. When we are thinking about this kind of the types of learning, we know that we need to accommodate both synchronous and asynchronous learning. The reason, one of the big reasons why we need to do asynchronous learning is because even though we can bridge space, we cannot bridge time, right? And the world still has 24 time zones, so we need to be able to accommodate that that limitation with asynchronous learning. So when we mean by transformational learning, so I know that we have been talking quite a bit about the end of the lecture for, a long time now, but we believe, and this is, if you teach in a business school, it's perhaps even more obvious that inductive learning is going to be increasingly what students desire, right? So inductive learning, as opposed to deductive learning. Deductive learning is when you kind of give students a theory and then you ask them to apply it, or set of principles or something, and then have them apply. Inductive learning is when they actually learn it themselves, right? So an example of inductive learning is a case study method where students are reading case studies and are then being asked to kind of say, what happened in this company and what are the principles by which the company should work, right? It's also, when you do inductive learning, you're much more interacting with your peers and you're learning from your peers. So you're not just learning from the faculty member, but you're learning from your peers. And what you're learning is how people might think about the same problem differently, which is a skill that is increasingly more and more important in the workplace, and being able to do it in an interactive way. The other piece that we feel is important is kind of what we call learner insights. And of course, many of you have been in the education industry for quite some time. So when I say learner insights, you probably immediately think of learning analytics. And that's, that is the underpinning of what we are talking about here. So let me just kind of shift gears here a little bit and talk about more generically, not just about what is happening here at Harvard, but kind of interesting ideas in educational technologies. And I think there are three that are worth just mentioning to open our conversation. The first one is learning analytics, kind of bridging to what I just talked about, digital transformation and artificial intelligence. So learning analytics has been around for quite some time, going back to signals at Purdue and other experiments of trying to use data from the various systems that students use to predict outcomes, right? And the reason why people were interested and continue to be interested in this is to improve student retention, support kind of decision-making, and provide personalized support. However, learning analytics is not easy, right? And the reason why it's not easy is because it presents several issues. That kind of the four big ones are privacy, agency, algorithmic bias, and third parties. So I ran a study in, I think, 2019, if I remember correctly, which asked students what their expectations of learning analytics were. And I ran it across around roughly a 10,000 student, undergraduate student population, student body. And I used a validated instrument, which is called Student Expectation of Learning Analytics Questionnaire. That instrument is publicly available. And what was very interesting was that students had very strong ideas about privacy. And in some ways, students were coming to the idea of privacy from the kind of the commercial world, right? So they really expected to be asked for their consent before data was being used. They were expecting to give consent before data is outsourced and before data is reused. Well, now, even at your institutions, you know that you do reuse of student data all the time. You have collected data for purpose of registration, and you may reuse it for insights into how to use, how to allocate classroom space, for example. So the expectation of the students is kind of slightly higher, or perhaps quite a bit higher than how many institutions function today, and and the way that institutions function today is consistent with FERPA, right? In the United States, at least, with the federal guidelines, right? So somehow coming from the commercial world, or having experienced primarily commercial world, the students are coming with a different level of expectation of disclosure than what functioning in an educational institution necessarily requires. The other one is was a series of questions on agency. There was slightly less consensus on that. You don't see as many strongly agrees in those questions. But what was interesting was that students still were interested in learning analytics, promoting student decision-making, and showing their progress against course goals, and supporting their academic and professional skill development. And what is interesting about this is anytime we are deploying certain types of products, the question is, how do we design, let's say, the learning analytics dashboards in a way that are understandable? And so there are several studies, primarily in Australia by Roberts et al., that show that when you engage students in designing the dashboards, you end up with different dashboards than you originally thought, because the students are interpreting the data in a slightly different way. So these are kind of the expectations of students, and how we fulfill those expectations are, I think, an important element for us to think about as technology professionals, because oftentimes when we're deploying learning analytics, we are deploying them in a context or primarily responding to an institutional need or to faculty need, and students actually feel that they should have a say in how those are deployed. The other piece about learning analytics, and where I think the issue of purchasing versus developing learning analytics really comes in, is in the area of algorithmic bias, right? So anytime we are talking about any sort of analytical, be it learning analytics, any other analytics, business analytics, there is some sort of an algorithm that is working beneath it, right? So when we talk about bias, it is a systematic deviation in algorithm output, performance, or impact relative to some norm, right? That's basically how bias is defined. And there, on the right side, what you see is an article where there was a piece of software called EAB Navigate that was used by a large number of universities, and it was sold basically as a black box product. So you would sign up, and you would send EAB your data, and EAB would analyze the data for you and let you know which students might be at risk. And the universities that purchased these products did not have a way of assessing the algorithm, right? Of making sure that that they understood how the algorithm worked. And what happened was that race was used as a predictor of student success. So there was biasing potentially in this algorithm that was baked in, but the institutions didn't know because they just purchased this algorithm without knowing how it worked, right? So the example that is given here as in an academic paper, right, is actually what happened to a number of institutions in the United States. Why is this important? Algorithmic bias is real. And we as university technology professionals need to really think about when we are engaging with our institutions, how are we voicing our expertise about this specific issue of algorithmic bias, and how are we thinking about the trade-offs between developing our own algorithms, perhaps working with faculty, or purchasing something that someone else has developed that cannot be analyzed, right? And either algorithm can be wrong. The question is which one can be examined and which one we understand better, and how do we mitigate that risk? It's just a second. It will be difficult to talk about learning analytics and not touch on digital transformation. And obviously there's a seminal book of Marco Incusini and Karim Lakhani from Harvard Business School, The Competing in the Age of AI. You may have read this book. It uses examples of different industries and how they function differently, right? And it really, the competing in the age of AI is around this idea that that enterprises that are competing successfully in the age of AI are going to be able to unleash data and algorithm to work over that data in order to gain insights into their operations more quickly. And one of the really interesting case studies that is in this book, and also they wrote an excellent case study on this, is Moderna. So of course you all know Moderna from the COVID-19 pandemic, and Moderna developed the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine in a very different way than traditional pharma industries. And what it was using was data, essentially an extensive data lake and AI insights in order to speed up the development of their vaccine. And it worked in a very, very different way than typical companies such as Pfizer. And ultimately, what they were able to do was develop a vaccine that was slightly faster, but also was commercially as viable as the private industry. But their return on investment was much, much higher than it was in the traditional industry. So the thing for us to think about is, how do we as university technology professionals help our institutions unleash the insights locked in the data that we already own, right? And oftentimes what this requires is rethinking the structures and historical approaches, because oftentimes the way that we have designed systems, they are extremely siloed and don't allow for these insights to be gleaned. Because obviously it's much easier for a new company to do this because it can build itself that way than it is for a more traditional company to do. And to that end, when we are thinking about AI, this is a picture from Gartner. It's kind of, what are the big challenges to adopting AI and machine learning, right? And this is kind of the top three, so it's across 4 different categories. And it's enterprise maturity, so skills of staff, data scope and quality, and understanding the benefits and use cases. And really the data scope and quality is something that we have been dealing with quite a lot, and I'm sure you have been as well, where we have a lot of data, we have historical data, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good data. Sometimes the way that we have broad data together is no longer as relevant. So for example, in the United States, in many states in the United States, we no longer have binary gender, right? But when we go to 10 years ago, we were only recording binary gender. So sometimes our data sources are a reflection of our historical understandings, right? So the data scope and quality becomes a major issue, and siloing of data and inconsistent data definitions, which we all have been fighting for quite some time, continue to be an issue. The other kind of three big things, and I talked about some of them already, is institutional data governance. Who owns the data, right? Do we give, are the students right that they should give consent, or are they not, right? Who owns data? And as you know, in global institution, globally, the whole question of what rights to your data do you have vis-a-vis a company is an open question that is, being legally defined across the globe. Then the other question is, do we build the tools or do we acquire them? And there's the caution of kind of the black box approach. And then how do we review the models that we use to make sure that we don't have algorithmic bias that might creep in? It would be difficult talking about AI to not talk about ChatGPT. I'm sure that is hotly debated on your campuses as well. ChatGPT kind of burst onto the scene, and it seems like everyone has woken up to the possibility of generative AI. In some ways, the use of something like ChatGPT can be deceptively simple, right? Because we already, at universities such as Harvard, we already have policies where you cannot submit work that you did not produce as your own, right? So in some ways, you can just say, well, even if AI does it, you still have not done it yourself, right? And that's kind of the easier question. So how, and then how you detect what essentially would be called plagiarism when somebody submits a ChatGPT paper that they have not written as their own. There are different approaches. There are some people that are considering, or some faculty that are considering going old school, which is going back to the blue books and handwritten exams or oral exams. And then there are companies such as Turnitin, which is already a plagiarism detection software that are developing ways to detect text produced by ChatGPT. So you can see a future, by the way, that where we have one AI producing essays and another AI trying to catch the AI that produced the essays. It seems little far-fetched, but it could be our future in a few years. But I think kind of more interesting question in this space is thinking about what we teach, right? And I think this is something where our Vice Provost for Advances in Learning, Parag Anand, is doing a wonderful job spearheading a conversation across campus, because even if we keep AI from the classroom, just imagine for a second that we can, whether it's going to blue books and oral exams or something else, when students enter the workforce, they need to be able to essentially be augmented by AI, right? So it's a complicated set of questions where I think we as technology leaders have the opportunity to just play a role and lend a voice. We are not the determining voice, but we are a contributory voice, because this is something that our institutions will have to examine. And the reason why we need to figure out kind of how we engage with our institutions in a different way, and how we kind of lend voice to some of these issues and lend our expertise, is because we all know that this is just the beginning, right? Basically, if you still look at a lot of online courses, they basically just replicate face-to-face instruction. We have not really seen true innovation yet. We have not really seen a different way of thinking about kind of providing information. A lot of the time, like in this picture, this a student watching a lecture, usually in 5 to 6 minute segments, and then interrupted with a quiz. Well, that's not really, that's not terribly innovative, right? So kind of how do we start thinking a bit more out of the box, I think is going to be an important area of inquiry for our institutions. So with that, let me stop, and hopefully we can have a discussion. I hope I gave you some things to think about and ask questions about.
Thank you very much, Klara, for sharing your thoughts, sharing your plans at Harvard, because it's very inspiring to see that what we have learned so far, what we have done so far, pre, post, or during a pandemic, and now what the future looks like, because there are new realities, and the way we are addressing those realities and looking at your presentation and looking at hearing your thoughts, I think it's very inspiring, and that there are a lot of takeaways for us and a lot of potential for even more learning for us, actually. So I'm receiving a lot of questions, so we will take a couple of questions. First question is, given the rapid advances in digital education, based on the presentation they've just heard, what is your quick view on the future of physical or in-person education?
I actually believe it is going to continue. And let me explain why. And especially for undergraduate education. So, let me qualify that a little bit. There is a piece about going to college, at least in the United States, where for the first time, students are not living with their parents, right? So this is one of the things that that universities provide is a way in which high school students embrace adulthood in a safe way, if you will. And I think that is not replicable online from your basement, right? And so when you talk to students about what they missed most during the pandemic, it was the co-curricular, the extracurricular experiences, not necessarily the educational experiences, because the educational experiences, that piece, we were able to deliver. But what we were not able to deliver is kind of this growth experience that people have when they live on college campus and explore, meet people from different backgrounds that they never met before. Most universities are international. Harvard is nearly 30% international, right? So it's not, those are opportunities that they would not have had otherwise. And I think from that perspective, the in-person experience is going to continue. The other reason why it's going to continue is there are certain fields that you simply cannot right now train remotely. So imagine going to the doctor who said, "Oh yeah, I studied this online. This is my first appendicitis, but trust me, I got an online certificate," right? I mean, you would not be very happy about having that surgery, right? So there are certain fields that you need to where we have not figured out how the physical can be supplanted by the digital. Does that make sense, Shaukat?
Yes, thank you. I think it perfectly makes sense, and I think you have answered in a very fair and open way of what we think the future looks like, and still the importance of this in-person classes or in-person education.
May I just add, I'm sorry, may I just add one thing? One thing that we need to realize, and this is where I think there's going to be a tremendous growth of digital education, and I'm not the first person to say it, right? Is that students or the people that are graduating today are going to go through multiple significant career changes because technology is going to evolve faster. So the kind of the certificate or upskilling or changing your career, that's where I think the growth in digital education is going to be. So it's not going to be, I don't think that digital education is necessarily going to replace going to college when you are 18 to 22, but it's going to be needed in order for people to have careers. I'm sorry to have interrupted.
No problem. Thank you for clarifying. So, Klara, I'm getting a lot of questions, so I will just try to ask the themes which covers the overall questions to just within the next 15 minutes. So, another question is, when it comes to AI, algorithms are often developed in North America or Europe. Does this mean that, for example, for Aga Khan University would need to build its own algorithms to ensure applicability to our context? Or there are ways we can enhance models by sharing data from here to build more global applicable algorithms? Or would global models weaken algorithms, predictive ability, and regional algorithms actually make sense?
It's a great question, right? So one of the way that you have bias that seeps into algorithm, which clearly the person that is asking the question knows, is by having a sample that's not the right sample, right? So you have a biased sample in some way, right? So that is the core issue. Now, I think you can do all three things. It's not that one is more right than the other. But I think it's going to be important for people at the universities to actually understand how these algorithms work, right? So you will be able to choose which one of these options you want to take. I think there is an opportunity, to be honest with you, for technology organizations to work with faculty and potentially try things out, right? Because in some ways we have really bifurcated a little bit the computer science advances that happen on our campuses from the delivery of technology services on the campuses. If you go back to the years of Eudora, when we actually, and Cyrus email systems, when we actually used to develop things that we were running on campuses, maybe now is the time to embrace that again and work more closely with faculty and figure out which model is better. I would just say what we have seen in the United States and in institutions, I've just recently completed another study on this. What I have observed in institutions was the institutions that were doing this were the most mature in this space were developing their own algorithms. And the answer of why they were doing it was because they could never quite get the right sample from the vendors. Now that might change because the products always evolve and they get better. But that was something that struck me, was that there were few institutions, usually public institutions, fairly large ones, that would say, we tried to use someone else's product, but our problem was so unique that the algorithm did not quite work in our population.
Thank you, Klara. Maybe this also means that the importance of collaboration, for example, right, with the global universities, academia, or institutions. At the moment, the data is this question, actually in the question, it was saying that mostly it's Europe or North America, because that's where the data is captured, right? And then the research is based on that. Maybe then there are a lot of potentials about collaborating, for example, Harvard between AKU, Harvard between other universities in other parts of the world, where these premier universities and institutions can enable those local universities to actually use the data based on the learnings from the premier institutions, so that the outcomes of all that data will be relevant to the local context of where we are operating or the institutions are operating. So I think this has a really, I see a lot of potential here. And I think that's the way, because the institutions are generally they are mandated to respond to the environment. So I have another question from one of our colleague. The pace of knowledge is increasing rapidly. As you mentioned, skills in areas such as AI face a talent shortage. Other fields face a talent surplus, and AI may eliminate many white-collar jobs. Do you see universities continuing to focus on undergraduate or graduate programs, or will continuing education becoming increasingly important?
So, in 2019, Harvard was at a point where if you will, the financial revenue from non-degree programs was almost as high as from degree programs, which were all in person. So I would say we have been there even before the pandemic. And also at Harvard School of Continuing Education is nearly 100 years old, right? I think there's going to be growth in that kind of continuing education space, especially for people who are graduates or mid-career people. So I see it as more overall, because I think people are going to need more and more educational opportunities. There's a great McKinsey study that shows which skills are easily eliminated, by AI. So, a lot of it is, so like accounting, for example, I think is the frequent kind of very frequently mentioned, right? Because anytime you have a skill that's very rule-based, it's kind of easier, right? While human skills, compassion of nurses, for example, very difficult to augment by AI. So I think it's more about what universities teach and how universities prepare students to enter a world in which AI is decision support, right? It's possible that AI might actually make us more human. So to consider an alternate, less dark reality of AI eliminating all of our jobs and dystopia.
Thank you, Klara. And I have a question from our Vice Provost, Dr. Tashmin Kamis. She's also heading the quality and continuous learning of education here. Her question is, as you mentioned, faculty continue to mirror face-to-face classes online. How might we change face-to-face teaching and teaching spaces to ensure better use of what the technology environment afford to engage the learner, whether face-to-face or online? And also, she's requesting, can you shed more light on developing curriculum materials for digital education?
Yeah, so in at Harvard, very similar actually to AKU, we have a vice provost for advances in learning, which is where the engagement with faculty happens. And so there's a structure across Harvard that has learning analysts that are working with faculty. But as is potentially true at AKU, faculty have quite a bit of independence in development of their classroom materials. So this process, for us at least, has largely been showcasing faculty who are innovating, kind of putting them in a spotlight, providing advice and feedback, engaging faculty in conversations, So it was kind of more leading by example and, cheerleading people on than it has been a mandate from the top to force a change. I think it's a very complicated, that issue is very, very complicated. As far as integrating online, for us, the business school has absolutely been kind of an innovator in that space. And our continuing studies department, and a lot of it had to be with doing this idea of blended learning, but also providing experiences that are outside of the classroom for people who are in this blended world. I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to follow up offline.
Yeah, I think I will follow up because our colleagues are very, very interested to know more about that part. But just to respect the time, I will just take the last question. I have a lot of questions here, but I will just take the last question. Is Harvard exploring the metaverse at all as a way to enhance remote experience within and beyond the classroom, given the shortcomings in replicating the in-person experience?
So we are exploring all technologies continuously, right? And this is kind of what that chart was about. We are always looking, is there someone who does it better, right? And then we can adopt that technology, right? So we are always looking. Currently, we are not. It does not fit into our current plan for our learning experience platform, but it's possible that it will. I mean, we are one of the things that we need to embrace is the fact that we will continuously innovate. We are going to have to run systems that are extremely nimble, and we will have to be ready to swap systems out. Now, back to the question of your vice provost, that is going to be very easy for us as technology people, and for the students, not so easy for the faculty. So we will need to figure out how much change we can also drive through the institution. But yeah, always looking at new things.
Thank you, Klara. I think we have a comment from our Chief Medical Information Officer, Dr. Nadeem Ahmed, who is sitting here in the auditorium. So I will let him just comment here.
Klara, thank you so much for hello. Nice to meet you. Wasn't able to meet with you in Boston when Shaukat was there, but very nice to meet you here. And thank you.
You have to come back. You have to come back.
I will. Absolutely. I just had a question about the future of education and how AI and things like Chat GPT and the digital learning experience, how it's continuously evolving. There doesn't seem to be any limits, but you did identify, for example, myself as a physician, I can't imagine doing this anyway, but in person. But that said, have you identified at Harvard hard stops to say, we're just not going to go there for a digital education? And then if it's not out of scope, do you have the fear that certain educational programs will go away? Certain education will go away because of technology. And has the university discussed that?
And your mic cut out, but let me attempt to, because the question was, are there hard stops of technologies that we will not implement? Because if we implemented those technologies, it would so change the education that the education would go away, right? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, my apologies. I think the mic that I had a poor battery. But yes, the technologies would actually would undermine the very thing that you're trying to accomplish, is I think what I'm trying to get at. Has there been discussions about that? Thank you.
So, even with Chat GPT, there are discussions of should it be embraced or should it not be embraced, right? And you can see that there are divergent viewpoints between different, so like the English department where people learn how to write essays might have a bit of more of an existential crisis than some, biology, but we have not, and I think part of it is that you cannot really live in the bubble, right? Or in a bubble, right? You cannot just say, we are somehow going to ward off technology from our campus and keep it out, because that does not work. As we all know, the network is permeable. But I will say, since you are in the medical field, even in the medical field, you are dealing with AI, right? I mean, there have been a lot of development in AI decision support, and it can actually be helpful, because there's so many new advances in medicine that it's difficult for physicians to keep up with it. So having an AI assistant that tells you, hey, there has been this paper about your case, can be actually helpful, right? So I think there's an interesting question for us as we educate people in computer science and in other fields, is how do you actually develop these products ethically, and how you incorporate them correctly into your world, and how you curate information that these products provide, right? And so I think we can become we can prepare people for this world, but I don't think we can keep the world out. That's just my viewpoint. But great question.
So
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klara. I think there are a lot of questions, but of course we have limited time. Thank you very much for your very inspiring talk, and also giving very detailed answers for the questions. And I look forward for this continuing collaborations between Howard and AKU. I think there are a lot of potential, and I'm really looking forward. And I would like to also thank all the participants who are sitting here, and also all the participants who have joined us online, and all your interest and in questions. We will continue these discussions, and then try to explore, and then get these type of talks from experts actually who are doing in North America, in Europe, in other parts of the world, to learn their best practices, and then see what is relevant for us based on that knowledge. So thank you, each and every one of you, for your time and for your interest. And Klara, thank you very much on behalf of AKU. I really want to thank you for your time and inspiring talk. So thank you.
Thank you so much, and happy to connect offline on any of the topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Klara. Thank you, everyone.